Now we're going to hear about another hot topic, and the session is actually called Looking Beyond the Stats, Putting the Eye into Diversity. Now our guest speaker is Pavita Cooper, and she's the founder of More Difference. She's a leading culture and diversity expert. She's got over 30 years experience as an executive talent leader across a range of organisations, including Shell, Barclays and Lloyds Banking Group. Now, Pavita is committed to accelerating the progression of hidden talent in women, ethnic minorities and leaders from less traditional backgrounds. We're going to hear a lot more about that. And she's also the commissioner to the Board of Equality and Human Rights Commission, and she was awarded Woman of the Year at the Asian Business Awards in 2017. Would you please give a very warm conference welcome to Pavita Cooper.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm really excited to be here, particularly because it's the first time I've actually been at a proper conference in over a year and not talking down a line on Zoom to 500 people I can't see, but seeing you in this wonderful Technicolor is very exciting. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today. So I'm going to talk for about 30 minutes and then I'm going to stop. And I really would like to get into a conversation. There's no pressure for you to put your hand up and ask some esoteric question. I'm interested in your reflections, your observations, if you want to challenge anything I've said, or just tell me what's on your mind. But I'd like it to be a two-way thing. So I'm giving you fair notice, so we don't have what happened in the last session when we say we're going to questions now. So start thinking about what you want to say, and as I say, it can be reflections. So I want to start today's session by just taking stock, really, about where we are on the wider equality landscape. In the last 16 months, we have all faced a once-in-a-generation crisis. So the equality landscape has shifted. The pandemic has had a profound impact on the UK, and it's changed the way that we will live in society for decades. We know that. But there is a huge risk that the gulf that exists between the rich and the poor, men and women, the able, the disabled, minorities, majority population, that gap is going to just not get wider, but deeper. And I don't think that's something we can just stand by and watch and not recognise and acknowledge. So I wanted to start by just sharing some stats with you. So firstly, we know that the COVID-19 has had a negative impact, in fact, a regressive impact on women. And I'm sure you've seen this in your organisation. So we know that once it hit, it was predominantly women that ended up, and I'm generalising here, gents, so I know some of you will have been amazing and shared everything 50-50. But the reality is, most companies, what we saw, women shouldering the burden, majority of the burden when it came to things like childcare, homeschooling, which, as we all know, was a challenge in itself. And then as people are thinking about returning to work, and some organisations are retaining some degree of hybrid working, and there's an element of choice about who goes back, we're starting to see a little bit of its two-tier working system come into place. So if you've got a choice and you are going to reap the benefits of flexible working, particularly if you're a working parent, there are some enhancements to being able to work remotely and be able to support your kids, or an older parent, and be able to be around. So again, generalising, in many instances, it is men that are returning to the workforce more quickly, and as a result, they're being seen, and things that haven't happened for a long time, like career progression and promotion, and perhaps pay awards, that sort of thing, are happening sooner for them. So this was a big issue, and we're still seeing it now. The unemployment rate for ethnic minority workers has risen at 3 times the speed of unemployment for white workers. COVID-19 has had a disproportionate effect, as we know, for people from ethnic minority backgrounds, both in terms of their economic outcomes, but more importantly, their health outcomes. And we know that because they're overly represented in low-paid frontline jobs where they're facing customers on the front line, and therefore they were more at risk. A report last week from the Fawcett Society has suggested that women of colour are virtually invisible at the most senior levels in both the private and public sector. And we also know that's because women are overrepresented, again, women of colour, at entry-level roles rather than at the top. Something Laura shared, but I'm going to share it again because I love this stat. and because my husband's called Steve as well, there are more men called Steve and John who are CEOs in the FTSE 100 than there are women. And that's in 2021. There are no black leaders of anywhere in the FTSE 100 in any of the top 3 roles. So that's chair, CEO, CFO. Now, that hasn't been the case. In the last 10 years, we have seen men of colour, women of colour progress to the top. But for whatever reason, the chairs have moved around. And right now, at this moment in time, there are none. And what about the forgotten party, the 6 million working-age adults who are registered disabled? 1 in 4 of those facing redundancy because of COVID will be disabled. Almost a third of children in the UK now live in poverty, and some regions have seen such staggering growth. In the northeast of England, it's risen by 11 percentage points just in 5 years. But it's not just about poorest. Opportunities are still based on your kind of where you were born and who you are. So if you have parents who are professional, you're more likely to be in professional work and you're more likely to be in higher paid jobs. We can't still live in a society where you're born dictates where you end up. And we know that only 7% of school children are educated privately, but they hold over 70% of the jobs at the top of British institutions. And that just isn't right. If you went to Oxford, you went to a Russell Group university, that doesn't mean that you are more capable than somebody else. And all of this in an environment that you will all know better than me, in a world where, as lockdown eased, we saw an increase in race-related hate crime, and we're seeing an increase in the number of LGBTQ people who are facing hate crimes in the street too. So what does this mean for policing? Well, I think the first thing it means is that society is changing. The needs of the people that you serve are changing. The people who are thinking about coming into the workforce, their lives and their experiences are changing. And I think that's really important to think about. I know that as leaders, you're really committed to building engagement with the communities you serve. I know you're really keen and interested in understanding your workforce. I know you're preparing yourselves for the digitisation of your environment. So that's why these things really matter. So how are you doing? So I've seen some of your data, so I'm just going to share my insights based on the limited data that I've seen. So where I think you're doing well, a third of your workforce is female. That's fantastic. But it's not represented at all levels. And that's where I think you need to be thinking that, how do you address that? Because actually just bringing people in, whether they're from a minority background or because they're women, is not enough. You need to think about how when you bring people in, how you're moving them up through the organisation. And representation is important because people on the outside of your organisation look in. So as a woman who is thinking about joining, they'll be thinking, well, is this the place I can make it to the top? Because if I can't, I'm going to go and choose somewhere else. And the thing to remember in today's world, when everybody wants all this great diverse talent, they are going to have so much choice. Companies like Deloitte have announced that they want 70% of their new graduate intake to come from a social mobility background. They're heavily ramping up recruitment around BAME candidates. Any company you look at, they're all after the same pool of people. And if you look at your entry-level recruits, they won't be that different. They will also have choices in terms of what they want to do. Your ethnic minority representation, and I don't need to tell you this, because if you look around the room, it's pretty obvious, is pretty poor, right? So what we have here today is not representative of society. So your ethnic minority representation is half of the UK ethnic minority representation. And at the next census results, which we think will come out around April, we suspect that will go up to about 14%, so it will get worse. Estimates suggest that by 2031, possibly, ethnic minority representation in this country could be at 40%. So at the very glacial pace that you're moving at the moment, your gap is going to widen and widen and widen. So this is the area that I think you are going to have to think about how you go after a bit more aggressively. But does it matter at the end of the day? Well, it's really interesting. When I started on this journey, working specifically in this area about 10, 15 years ago, I think a lot of leaders I talked to, particularly a lot of older chairmen, used to think, oh, diversity is that thing that it's good to do because it's popular, we should all do it. It was almost a sense of benevolence. That has definitely changed. I mean, there is not an organisation I work with anywhere in the world that doesn't take this really seriously. In fact, in the private sector, investors are now voting against boards that can't demonstrate their ESG agenda or can't demonstrate that they've got really good, strong ethnic minority representation on their boards. They're voting out and kicking out the chairs and CEOs. So you don't particularly live in that world, but you live in a world where there is scrutiny on what progress you're making and who leads your institutions and who is at the top. So it does matter. We know that those organisations also do better in terms of profit, they do better in terms of performance, they do better in terms of engagement. But more importantly, we know the more diverse talent you have inside, the more likely your diverse talent are going to want to join you. If people from the outside look in and just think, snowy top mountains there, I don't see myself in that institution, they are not going to join. I think you're kidding yourself if you think some great advertising and some great recruitment campaigns will change that, because they won't, unfortunately. We also know that what diversity builds is trust, and you are all about trust. Trust with the communities you serve, your people. Trust is critical, and you get that with more diversity. So what gets in the way then? I get asked this question a lot. So why is it companies, organisations, institutions don't just suddenly adapt and get better at this? Because it's really hard. It's really difficult, because it's about the small things you do every single day. So for the purposes of today, I've tried to basically distill 3 key things that I see in companies that I think are starting, and I mean starting, to get some traction, because it takes a long time. The first one I want to talk about is the myth of meritocracy. So if people say to you, our systems are fair, they're really meritocratic, this is a place where the best talent can rise to the top, we're not interested in any of the 9 protected characteristics, we're just about get the best person and let them rise to the top, we know that that is an untruth. Because if that was the case, every organisation in the UK would have 50-50 gender split, they'd have much better representation from all the various minority groups in their organisation, and we don't have that. So why is that? Well, firstly, we're all human. I know that you're all very well-intended individuals. Like me, you get up in the morning and you think, I'm going to go to work today and I'm going to try my very best to do the best for my people, for my organisation, for society, because that's what I'm about. And I'm part of a system where I'm going to build systems that give equality of opportunity to everyone, and then as a result, we'll get equality of outcome. But those stats that I just read you at the beginning of this session tell you that that doesn't work. And that's because the notion of meritocracy is a myth. Because what you have is systems that are then having subjective opinions placed upon them. You've got human beings running those systems. And the real issue you've got is that what really happens in organisations is there's a whole different set of rules at play. But unfortunately, it's not in the handbook that they give you on day one. And invariably, there's only a small group of people who get to see those rules. And that group is different in every organisation. You can't generalise. So if you're in the legal profession, if you're in the NHS, if you're in policing, if you're in a big bank, the in-group will be a different group in every institution, but they exist. And the rules they're playing at are different to the ones that are in the rhetoric on the posters on the wall when you go in reception, but nobody else has been told. Little things like, this is what people tell me when I go into companies. When I say, what does it really take to get on around here? The most typical things I will hear are things like, oh, right, well, basically, you have to really know leader X or Y, because they're the ones who really make the decisions. If I say, where does the soft power sit? Oh, in that department, they're the ones. They've got the biggest budget, they make all the decisions. So basically, unless you're kind of doing something with them, you don't stand a chance. Where do promotion decisions get made? Oh, you know that pub down the road? That's where they will go on a Thursday night. So that's where generally you get to find out who's getting promoted. What about how do I get onto the right team or get the right experience? Oh, right, well, basically, there's sort of 3 teams, and they decide who gets the best assignments, best projects, who gets moved where, and if you don't know them, then you're not going to get on. This is the reality that plays out in all systems. It's not specific to any one industry, it's everywhere. But why does that matter? Well, let's take promotion, for example. In most organisations, and I know yours will be loosely similar, there will be a promotion panel, a succession board review, some process centrally where people come together and decide who gets promoted. I have sat in hundreds of those over my career. I never want to do another one again, but I've done a lot. And there are some patterns that play out in those meetings. The really key one that happens is that people get nominated before you go in, and invariably, in good practice, it's not just your boss doing it, someone above your boss, maybe your boss's boss, is the person who has to spend some time thinking about who do I think I should pick. Now, if you're in a circle where all the people you know are like you and you're recruiting in a mini-me mirror image, then you're going to only put forward people like you, and all the hidden talent, the untapped talent in your organisation, doesn't get close to being selected to get on that list. If you're lucky enough that you slip through that net and you get through, then you're faced with the reality of the fact that the 9 people sitting around that board table and someone like me facilitating goes around and says to everyone, do you know Jane? She's in this box, ready now, successor. Person 1 says, yes, I'm her boss's boss, I know her, she's great. The other 8 will say, sorry, who is she? I've never met her, I don't know her, never really had seen her in action operationally, I don't really know what she's like. That lack of sponsorship is what stops that talent moving through and different people getting promoted. And the reason that's important is that sponsorship has been identified as the most critical factor in helping move promotions and progression in organisations. So if you're ethnic minorities and your women aren't moving through, it's lack of sponsorship. We also know that women and ethnic minorities are over-mentored and under-sponsored. So lots of mentoring, lots of nice chats, let me talk about your career, how's it going? Absolutely useless and pointless. Makes you feel great, but it doesn't shift a dial on your career. Sponsorship is when someone leans in and uses their personal agency for no personal gain for themselves to activate and move your career on. It is doing real things like saying, I'm going to this conference tomorrow, why don't you come with me? We can find a way, get you on, then you can go and meet some great people, they'll get to know you. There's this great project coming up, I want you to put yourself forward. Or, look, I saw you in that meeting, it was okay, not great, let's think about how we can give you some support to help you think about how you present differently. That's what sponsorship is, it's very different. The other thing I want to talk about those promotion meetings that's really important is a subtle thing happens in them, and this is why culture is so important. Often, when people are talking about men and women, there is coded behaviour around how we describe how different genders perform and how they show up. And again, I'm generalising, but I have seen this in multiple countries, in multiple environments, in multiple boardrooms. So I know it for it to be a fact, because I've got evidence for it. So when boards, men and women, talk about men, they will often describe somebody as focused, great at delivering, he's tough, he doesn't take any prisoners, he's great at getting the message across, he's ruthless. So these are strong male traits that are perceived to be attached to strong leadership. If a woman who displays exactly the same behaviour is being described, she'll be described as she's got sharp elbows, she doesn't take people with her, she tends to upset everybody, she's cold, her people don't like her. She gets stuff done, but she doesn't do it in the right way. And they're describing exactly the same behaviours, because for women there is this penalty of not being able to be both competent and be liked. They have to walk a very, very narrow line, which is you can either be really warm and friendly and be considered to be incompetent, or you can be super competent, but basically not just men, but women won't like you either. So it's a tough thing. So you need someone in that meeting calling out those loaded behaviours. When it comes to ethnic minorities, what happens is loaded assumptions around race comes in. So they might talk about an Asian man, and they might say things like, he's really good, he really delivers, but he doesn't show up around here in a way that we like to see leaders be. What does that mean? That's coded language for that person needs to fit in and be more like us. So fact number 2, the issue number 2 that I want to talk about that I think comes up a lot in organisations is this idea of diversity as a fact and inclusion as a choice. Every day you choose whether to include somebody in your team, whether it's conscious or unconscious, you choose. And I like to think about this as, what does it feel like to belong in your team? So if I went to your team tomorrow and I said, how does it feel to belong here? What would they say? Belonging is a bit of a diversity buzzword, but for me it means, to what degree do I feel I can be myself around here? I bet all of you can recall a moment sometime in your life when you didn't feel like you belonged. So it could be a first day in a new job. It could be when you didn't get picked for a sports team. That was me, because I was always rubbish at sport at school. But it also might be something a little bit deeper than that. It might be a part of yourself you don't reveal. It might be a religious belief. It might be something about your sexual orientation. It just might be something about you that when you're at work, you just withhold. Now, you could argue that all of us to a degree do this, that your kids might laugh and say, oh, you've got a funny voice when you talk to your colleagues at work, or you always act a bit differently when you're at work. We all do that to a degree. But let me tell you, there are some groups of people for whom this is a lifetime's journey of challenge, because they are holding back a part of themselves every bit of the day. So If you don't feel that all of you fits, you develop these two things called a work self and a home self. Now, the home self is where you're truly yourself, and the work self is where you start to adapt in order to fit in with a dominant culture. Because what you quickly work out, you look around you is, I need to be a certain way to be successful here. So the more I can be that person, the more likely I'll be promoted. The more I can speak and behave and show up in a particular way, the more likely I'll be fitting in and people will feel that I'm part of the team. It's called code switching or masking. And code switching is exhausting. And let me tell you, I did it for 30 years, and it's only when I left that I realised how long I'd been doing it for. Because you basically turn up as somebody completely different, and you project an image, a perception of yourself that you feel is socially suitable to your work environment. And the more senior you get, the harder it gets, because the price, the jeopardy is higher. The more you have to fit in, the more perhaps your own values you're leaving behind, the more you feel you're not being your authentic self, and it can be a real challenge. It can actually lead to huge amounts of stress. And imagine someone who's spending so long trying to modify their language and their behaviour. So a lot of young black men will say, and young black women also will say in the workplace, I have to really be measured about how I speak. If I'm big, I can't step forward because I might alarm someone. So I'm constantly adjusting who I am so that other people feel okay about me. Imagine doing that all day long, and these poor kids are doing it. So if it's all about fit, what messages are you sending to your people? What messages are you saying about, in my team, this is what fit looks like. You've got to be like this in order to fit in. Now, it might be that some of you are saying, I'm all up for difference of all types, neurodiversity, social mobility, different experiences, different life experiences. Great. I would imagine in your team, fit feels great. But what if you're in your team where other people look in and say, that's just 15 people who are basically one version of the same person? That happens a lot. I see that a lot. When I read the verbatim on engagement surveys, that's the sort of thing it will say. You know, that person just hired 15 people that look like them. So why does culture matter? If you build a monoculture and you're in an environment where everyone has to be the same, look the same, act the same, well then frankly, where's your innovation coming from? Where's your challenge coming from? What if people stop speaking out? Speaking up or speaking out, both of which are important. What does that do to the way your organisation learns and grows? And more importantly, when you recruit great people from the outside, and sorry, that's me, I'll stop moving. when you recruit them and they come in, they're learning quickly, this is a place I can't speak up. So of course they leave, and my observation of your numbers is there's a bit of a revolving door. Lots of great activity bringing people in, but guess what? People are not moving up, so they're moving out. And a revolving door is not helping anything to do with diversity, because what people are learning is, oh, this is a place that I don't really fit. And these unicorn candidates, as I call them, the one black leader, the one senior woman, the one gay poster boy for leadership in part of the organisation, these do nothing for your cause, because what they do is people lower down don't look up and say, oh, wow, isn't that person amazing? I really want to be like them. This is what they really say, particularly about women. Oh my God, I can't be like her. She's perfect. She's got 3 kids and she's got this huge job and, you know, she just looks amazing and she's really tough and she's been really successful. If that's what it takes to be at the top, that's not for me. Same for black leaders. Same if you're from the LGBTQ+ community. Doesn't matter who you are, this is the same issue that happens time and time again. You need a critical mass, and that critical mass, sorry, we're going to do a little... Very much. You need a critical mass, and that critical mass has to be at least 30% for whatever the group is that you're trying to create change for. Without 30% critical mass, you've got a unicorn candidate. And on their own, it's pretty lonely, pretty miserable, and they've got no one else that they can go. And also you're putting all the burden of change on them. It's not on the shoulder of the one person of colour or the one woman to change your culture. It's on everyone. Therefore, the way to change it is to get more people in. And that's really, really important. So we call this having role models throughout the company, but I like to call it real models. People who are really reflective and representative of the people lower down in the organisation that can look at and they can say, oh yeah, so I've got a similar shared life experience. I could be that person. I could get there. I could move to that next level. I could go and talk to them. So reverse mentoring, all these things are great. But the most important thing is at a conference like this, if more junior people came in, they'd look around the room and they'd say, I see myself here. And I have to say, I hope you don't take this the wrong way. When I look at this room, it doesn't feel very representative. And it's not a criticism, it's an observation. So I would ask you, is this the leadership that you want to represent back as a mirror to your organisation? Because if it's not, then you've got a year to do something before next year. And that might be bringing people more junior through. Pull them up 2 levels, get them an invite for 1 day. Each day, invite a couple of, maybe 10, 20 people who maybe just sit and observe at the back or join in at a table. That's how you start to create change. So the final area that I want to cover, unfortunately, is the hardest because it's got to do with you, but it's the one that makes the most difference. So in all my years of experience and with the multiple organisations I've worked with, I have never, ever, ever seen real change happen until I see an individual leader make a very personal and a very emotional connection with this issue. So I'd love to tell you there's a shortcut. I'd say go and read a book, watch this great video, come and have another hour coffee with me. None of that's going to work. It has to be really personal. And the reason I say that is that every single one of you and me has a conscious and unconscious bias. And when we pretend we don't, we're lying. We all have an ism. I've got plenty of isms. And we've all, so you'll all be, when I got up here today, you'll all be looking at me making judgments about me. What's her background? What does Pavita do? I wonder, but just making judgments in your head about who I am. But none of you actually know me. That's just human nature. So until you confront that, you can't really make any change. So this section is called Getting Comfortable with Being Uncomfortable. Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. What this means is you're going to have lots of conversations that are probably going to make you think, oh God, why did I decide to do this today? But you're not going to create shift in you or the organisation or the team you lead until you do that. So what does it mean? Well, I'll tell you what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean saying to your team, I'm not a racist, I don't see colour, or I'm really pro-women, or my best friend's gay. What it means is really deeply, and I mean deeply, listening and hearing the lived experiences of the colleagues in your organisation. And I don't just mean in their work life, I mean understanding the whole ecosystem of what they have to go through. I was running a session with a law firm recently, and these really amazing young people were talking to me about their experiences. And this lawyer that's on a 6-figure salary was saying, I run to work in the morning and I have a hoodie on and I regularly get stopped by the police. And then when I come into the workforce, my white colleagues treat me like I'm white because they're like, well, you're just like us. So that's the stuff I mean, which is really listening to people. And it's about the everyday experiences they have. So, for example, the microaggressions that we all know they will be experiencing. And when I say micro, which means small, you have to remember the impact on them is huge. It's enormous because they're carrying the weight of this, adapting in the workplace, code switching, dealing with all the microaggressions. And what I want to know is when that happens, what do you do? Do you intervene? Do you think I'm really busy, I'm just going to let it go? Or do you say, oh, Jill's great, she didn't mean anything by it, she's one of the good ones, so-and-so's just being a bit oversensitive. Because that impact as well on those individuals over time is what causes them to leave, because they feel not seen and not heard. It's deeply impactful. So I think what you need to really think about is how have you, on a personal level, really thought about, as a leader, what is it going to take for you to shift in your team, in your leadership style, in the way that you signal and message every single day that this matters and it's important to you. Because let me tell you, intervening when something goes wrong takes courage because there can be conflict. When you have to call something out, it is not easy because you might be calling out a colleague or a friend or someone you've known for a very long time. But the impact on the people around you when you do nothing is so damaging. You can't be both a leader and a bystander. You can only be one. You can be one of those two things. So you have to choose every single day which of those two things do you really want to be. The other thing I'd just like to mention is that active allyship, which is what we're asking you to step up and do, is more than just beyond what you do at work. Understanding issues around things like race go into how you live your entire life and your wider system. So June Sarpong calls this checking your circle. So I just want to share a very quick anecdote before we leave some time for questions. And after the really horrific murder of George Floyd, loads of organisations overnight decided to respond. CEOs were desperate to write wonderful statements about solidarity and we stand with you and we're going to redouble our efforts, even though we've done nothing for the last 10 years. We're really going to ramp it up now and we're really serious about this. And they wrote messages and emails and stuff on the websites. And suddenly I noticed, and it wasn't just a phenomenon that affected me, it affected many of my Black and Asian colleagues, people who I knew professionally in passing, I'd never really known very well, were suddenly saying, yes, and I'm really good friends with Pavita. I'm thinking, I've never been to your house. I've never seen your kitchen. I don't know your partner's name. You don't know the name of my kids. We're not friends. But they were so desperate in this race to say, I've got a Black friend. And it was a thing. It happened. And I was like, really? You don't know one person of colour in your immediate system, so you have to come to me? And I was really shocked. And then I talked to other people who said, yep, happening to me too. So just look at your own life and think, who do you play sports with? Who do you socialise with on a Saturday night? When you take the kids out and you've got a group of friends playing football in the park, who else is there? If your life outside of work pretty much mirrors what you're doing in work, you will not have understood what these issues are. So I think you just have to really think about examining at a very personal level what this means to you and how you look at the world and how you understand what's happening to other people, and therefore how do you bring that into your own practice as a leader in the workplace. Because remember, people are watching. The people who work for you are watching. They're not just watching what you say and do, they're watching what you don't say, what you don't do, when you don't take a stand. And as a leader, all you've got is your values. You know, how you take action. If they really thought you were serious about diversity, if they really thought it, they'd know because of the things you do every single day to make the environment for your team better. So it's not just about recruitment and hiring, it's about progression up and through the organisation. And if you're not able to move people through your organisation, they'll see that as a sign that it's not important. And I know that for most of you in this room, that isn't the case. You're really committed to this. So I'm going to stop because we're going to be running out of time. I would like to stop to take reflections, questions, comments, anything you want to share.
Very much. And you're right. Yeah, let's give a round of applause. Thank you. Now, we said, didn't we, when you bombard the audience and that you give them all this information and then you say, right, come on, ask me questions. So we're waiting for those to appear. So I'm sure they will. Has anybody got a question they want to put?
Or reflection. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be an observation about your own. Yes, got one over here.
There's a gentleman over there with the glasses.
Hi, really enjoyed the input. I thought it was very thought-provoking. I was interested in what you were saying about, I think you called it code switching, where people can't be themselves. And I think you said that as people get more senior, it becomes harder. I was just reflecting on that because I do remember that as joining the organisation and it seemed to be it was a bit of a cultural jump for me for a variety of reasons, but I kind of remember thinking for that first few years, I'm not the same person at work as I am when I'm at home or with my family or the people I used to know, whatever. And I kind of think, though, more recently, 25 years later, I am actually more able to be myself because I'm in a more senior position or I've got more confidence or what have you. But I think there was a kind of, being new in the organisation, you don't really understand everything. You're in a very sort of vulnerable position in some ways. So that was the one thing I got everything else you were saying, but I wasn't quite sure about that particular point.
But thank you for sharing that. And I think it's really honest of you to say it felt like that at the beginning and not later. The reason it's different, and there's a lot of evidence on this, it's very, very well researched, is that if you're Black, Asian or gay, you're going to feel you're doing more code switching than any other group. And that's because this thing about fit that I talked about. So even if you get to a very senior level, you're still doing that masking code switching to fit in. Because there'll be things and traits, for example, around how you show up and behave. I'll give you a very personal example. I worked at a very, very senior level in a big multinational organisation, And I didn't notice I was doing it to that degree until I left. And the stress it put me under, I didn't notice till I stopped. I had my second child very late in life, and I was on maternity leave, which I hadn't taken the first time. And that's when I suddenly felt this overwhelming surge of, who was that person? What did I turn into? I was pretending to be somebody else. In the work I do now, I'm much more myself. I will be more honest about what I say, what I think. I don't pretend. I talk openly about who I am, my background, my parents. I hid all of that. And I'm not saying anyone asked me to. I just felt that that's what I had to do to be accepted. So both things are true. Your experience is true, and the experience of those minority groups who code switch is true also. But thank you. Anybody else? You can just... Oh, we've got one at the back there.
Hello, good afternoon. Simon Evans from the Met. You've mentioned quite a lot of what you think we should do, and there's not been an awful lot on how we might actually do that. I have a particular problem in London where we were doing quite well, with particularly women from black and ethnic minority backgrounds getting up to our ranks. Then there was a bit of a storm, and they almost all left together, and there aren't the people coming up from behind them. And many of those people have now launched employment tribunals against the organisation. So why has it gone backwards, do you think? Because I think it has. And what might we do to try and reverse that trend that seems to show people getting to the top, having a bad experience and leaving in adverse circumstances?
So there's a couple of things. I think any organisation has to, when you're looking at things like the pipeline, bringing people in, start much earlier in the process. So we call it schoolroom to boardroom. You know, so really thinking about, and I know you do a lot of activation in the community, going in much, much earlier with much younger children to sort of talk about the police force and the opportunities and the roles, and the fact that there's such a wide range of roles. I think lots of companies get that wrong. They only sort of put forward one image of what the job can be, and of course there's so much diversity in the roles that you can do in the police force. The second thing is this issue of what people are joining. So when they come in, really examining is there enough support structure? You know, is there some reverse mentoring going on? Do you have affinity groups? Are there opportunities for people to sort of share where they're struggling, having problems? And the reality is, if they're hitting brick walls, you know, where is the support for that coming from? So in some organisations, what they'll do is assign someone who isn't a line manager, but somebody else senior, who will have an opportunity to check in with those individuals and look at their progress. People leave silently. So one bad thing happens. They don't tell anyone. Women do this particularly. And then they don't tell anyone, but then they start thinking about how they're going to leave, what they're going to do. And at the exit interview, they don't tell the real reason why. But it was something that maybe happened 12 months ago that caused them to go. And we've got to be honest, you know, people leave the line manager and the culture. So I'm happy to have a conversation with you offline. There are multiple things that you can do, but a lot of it is structural in those early career appointments and people feeling it's fair and they're getting the support and they're getting opportunities that feel equitable to other people around them.
Okay. Any more questions from the room?
There's one, there's two.
Couple. We're on a roll now, Pavita.
Hi there. Thank you very much for your presentation. David Oram from BTP. I've heard, probably with colleagues, heard a similar narrative to your presentation for the past 30 years. Spurt of energy after George Floyd, tragic death in the States. What, if anything, is different this time around?
I was born here, and when I grew up in the 70s and 80s, racism was very overt. You know, my grandmother lived on a council estate. We'd have bottles of flares thrown through the window, and we lived next to a door to a police station. Didn't make no difference. Racist abuse on the bus, on the train. My kids don't get that now. You know, they go to a middle-class school. We live in a middle-class area. It's all very polite, but it hasn't gone away. It's called modern racism. So it means that there is a narrative which says, well, racism's gone, hasn't it? Hasn't all that stuff gone away? It just exists in a different way, which is, let's stop talking about race, let's move on. I think what George Floyd did is it triggered, because it's different issues in the US, it triggered a sense of injustice on what things still aren't working here. So many of the large organisations I work with have got similar issues to the ones that you guys have described here. And people just said, enough, we have to do something about this. We have to be able to talk openly about things that are happening, behaviours, microaggressions, lack of progress, lack of opportunity, pay gap, ethnicity gap, all these things that are real. And I think that's different, and it started a debate both more widely in society and the media, a bit like it did with women 10 years ago. And I'm not saying it's going to happen quickly. It's taken us 10 years to get to a point where every board in the UK FTSE 100 has a woman on it. These are slow, but I do think the conversation has shifted. Sorry, there was a gentleman here there, sorry.
Hi, Pavita.
Hi.
I'm Simon Nelson. I represent the Disabled Association members. We have a lot of conversations within our particular groups for different characteristics, but as same with the other three colleagues who represent other groups, we have a lot of conversations because we recognise that individuals can have a variety of different protected identities. And I was just interested in your thoughts on intersectionality and the importance of supporting individuals rather than making assumptions about someone's needs.
Absolutely, it's really important. So I think generally for the population, the adult working age group who are disabled, it's the biggest opportunity around employment because they're the most undertapped. So I think it's a massive, and neurodiversity now is becoming so popular and large organisations are going behind this with huge force. So they are going after the same pool of people, so that's really important. Secondly, intersectionality is very important. So we know, for example, black women in most organisations have the worst experience when it comes to engagement, career outcomes, pay outcomes, just the sense of how they feel in the company. And when you look at things like race is different for everyone. Whether you're black or Asian or Chinese, the Bangladeshi individual is going to feel worse than the Sikh woman. So it's different. It's really important. But I think, again, what leaders need to do is in the conversations, they can understand the needs of individuals rather than making assumptions about what people need. And I think when initiatives are very centralised and someone at the centre of your business is telling you, this is how you should do it, here's a manual, here's a poster, go and treat everybody in this group like that, it doesn't work. And leaders have to engage on a one-on-one basis. Oh, there's two now.
Good afternoon. Emma Richards. I'm the gender lead for the PSA. And I'm interested because I heard that you said that you're a mother. I'm a mother of two. And we're looking at a 50-50 split of recruitment. But I think we miss a trick with our retention. And we lose women after the second child. Yep. If you were in charge of policing, what would be your 3 things that you would do?
I'd love to be in charge of policing. So I think I'd probably suggest what I say to most organisations, which is there's a reality factor here. What we have is more families in dual income, a situation where both people are working. And today there was a report that said on the average wage, cost of childcare is £523 and the average weekly wage is £504. So work out the maths, not worth it for most women to go back to work. So there's a couple of things. One is I think it's absolutely fine for parents, both men and women, to look at breaks around key ages of their children. I think it's about equalising and normalising men taking as much leave as women. So when the government introduced shared parental leave, the take-up rate for men was 7%. When large companies like Accenture and Unilever and Diageo and Shell equalised full pay for parental leave, the rates went up to 40% of men taking it. So I think shifting where we think the burden of childcare, assuming it's always a woman, I think is a societal issue that we need to address. The second thing is, I think, really helping women think about if I want to take a break, how do I take a break and then return? So staying connected with women, helping them stay skilled and finding ways for women to kind of off-ramp and on-ramp. All the babies born today, half of them will live till they're 100. We'll be working for 70 years of our lives. Men as well as women are going to want to take career breaks because we'll all keel over otherwise. So the idea that I leave the workforce, I come back, I go back, I do something else, is something we have to build in. And I think the other thing is recognising what is it that is a trigger point that makes people leave. And we did some research with the 30% Club and it showed the reason the second child is a trigger point is invariably what women do is they make a local arrangement with a line manager about how to work in a way that works for them. The minute HR get involved, it all falls apart. And this is someone who's a 30-year HR practitioner because HR will say, no, you've got to go on a spreadsheet, you've got to have a system, there's got to be a rule, we've got to cut your pay by half because, unless she's still working all the hours. So I think this relationship with a line manager who's able to contract and make it work for a woman, there's trust, and you're measured on outputs. There's very simple things you can do, and companies that have done that have seen retention really increase. Should we squeeze in one more? Yes, the lady there.
Hi there, I'm Kate from Norfolk.
Hello, Kate from Norfolk.
Hello. We're not exactly the most diverse community in Norfolk, and as a police force, very conscious of that fact and wanting to make some progress. I just wondered, in terms of the fact that policing is such a visible community service, and one bad media report can set us back hugely, whether or not that impact on your own force area is not relevant. We're seen as a collective. You talked about unicorns. As a senior openly gay officer in my force, I'm often encouraged to become a unicorn, whether I like it or not, all very well meaning. But how can we actually go about promoting diversity in a positive way, rather than holding up colleagues and sort of waving them in front of people? What can we actually do to positively promote diversity and encourage people to either trust us as part of the community or join our ranks?
So there are obviously parts of the country which have different diversity issues. I think you have to lean on allies at that point. So, for example, I think when men speak for women, it's really powerful. When the male business leaders of the UK came out and supported women on boards, that was the first time we ever made any progress. And I'll be frank, nothing happened before then. It took the men to say, this is what we need. And it's the same with race. You know, when you've got a white colleague that says, I'm going to call out something and we're really committed to making change and I want to increase representation in my team, that's when you make change. When a straight ally speaks for an LGBT plus colleague, or an able for a disabled, that's when you make change. So I think you have to use your allies. So I think, again, often what happens, the HR department, the D&I teams, other people, heads of the affinity groups are the ones who get pushed out to speak about this. I think line managers, their normal everyday work, are the ones who have to speak out on these issues. I know we're out of time. I'm just going to suggest to the gentleman from the Met at the back, if you want to catch me at the end, I'm very happy to have a chat with you about your recruitment.
Okay, all right, you're happy then. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Let's give a round of applause, please.
Thank you very much.
To Pavita.